I don't normally tell these stories to anyone because they sound outlandish, but I'm a professional as an MBA in English, and I've had some of the strangest things happen to me. The most memorable one was in the fall of 1990. I was a senior in high school, and my boyfriend and I were out with our best friend. Being a stupid teenager, I was riding on my boyfriend's lap in the front seat because we were just going to the park, which was only about 3 miles from where we were, and we lived in the middle of no man's land. There was a forest of trees in the middle of the fork. We were talking and carrying on, and my friend, Mike, took the left fork instead of the right fork. I looked up, fussing at him for taking the wrong road, when we saw this guy in a gray sweatshirt and blue sweatpants walk out of the trees right in front of the car. Of course, I thought we were going to wreck, so I braced my arm on the dashboard and ducked my head, preparing to be thrown through the windshield. I was screaming, but I felt no impact. When I looked up, we were on the right road going towards the park, and there was no one in front of the car. Of course, we stopped the car and mulled around for a few minutes, trying to see if maybe someone had wrecked in the trees, but there was no sign of anything. I do know that about 4 years before that, my brother had a good friend who died at the intersection while running from the cops after domestic dispute. He never made the turn and went straight into the trees. He left behind 2 small children. Maybe it was him trying to go home. My next experience happened with a Ouija board, and I can promise I'll never touch another one. We were trying to contact a friend who had passed away about a year earlier. I asked him to prove he was who he said, and he gave us some details that each of us in the room would know about him individually, but not collectively. I asked him to prove he was there. I heard something happening in the laundry room, and I threw the board into the hallway and went to look. All the cabinets above the washer and dryer were open, and all the storage sheets were laying all over the floor. My cat's food and water had been pushed to the opposite side of the room. It was too scary for all of us. We camped out together in sleeping bags on the floor, as close to one another as we could. And this is my final story, because this one is happening presently. I had a daughter 2 years ago. I decided to pass on my middle name, which has been a family tradition for girls in our family for years, Grace. The wild thing is, my daughter was due on June 21st, which I thought was cool because it was my brother's birthday, but she was born on May 27th, 1996, exactly 1 year to the date of the death of my Aunt Grace, whom I loved during life. She was my godmother, and she never had any kids, and I felt it was a meaningful tribute to her. Anyways, getting to my point, my daughter was born very sick, but became healthy very quickly. She has grown into a radiant little girl. We have moved 5 times since she was born, my job and me traveling, and we finally decided to settle near one set of my grandparents, so she could have the loving support I never had. So we moved to Atlanta. The strange thing is, I've noticed that she always has the coldest room in the house. My husband makes a joke out of it, since he is always hot, that he doesn't know how we always do that. I believe it is my Aunt Grace watching over her guardian angel. I've been in her room, putting her to bed, reading her a story, and felt someone sit on the bed with us with a great thud. My aunt was no little woman, but always a beautiful one. The strangest thing that has happened recently is that an old makeup case with a camo on it, with the powder still in it, has appeared in my home. I know I did not get this from my mom because we do not speak. It sits in my bookcase. When my husband and I married, I decided to use her wedding band, but it causes blisters on my fingers. It always appears in the jewelry box that I keep in my daughter's room. So now I know. My Aunt Grace wants my daughter to have it instead of me. I've always wondered what was going on in the house I grew up in. It was only 20 years old when we bought it. We knew the builders. It had only one owner since then, an old woman who kept cats. My mother bought the house when I was 4, and from day one, I was terrified to be in there. It just felt wrong. It was a small house, only 2 bedrooms, all on one level, with the exception of an attic and a basement. There were definitely sections of the house that felt safe, and sections that did not. The back bedroom closet, the bathroom, and the short steps and hallway leading to the back door and basement were not. The first bedroom, living room, and ironically enough, the kitchen, so as long as you put your eye on that back hall, were safe. The things that occurred in the house were experienced by the entire family, though my mother and older sister always had a reasonable explanation for them. Heavy breathing could often be heard. Mom's explanation, the swing set up the road creaking, footsteps across the ceiling, the neighbors. Now, our house sat alone and shared no walls, so how would we hear the neighbors going up their stairs inside their house? Items that were set down would suddenly vanish, only to reappear after much frantic hunting. But worse than that was the feel. People were loath to do anything that would make a loud noise. Vacuuming, showering, flushing the toilet, frying food, anything that made a cover-up noise. It always made you want to spin around and run when you couldn't hear past the noise you were making, as if for allowing something to sneak up on you. When anyone went down to the basement, which housed the washer and dryer, they inevitably ran down the stairs. Those stairs, you just didn't want to be caught on them. My mom was a compulsive decorator, and the only spot in the house that did not boast ornamentation was the hall leading to the basement stairs. Even she couldn't bear to be in there long enough to hang a picture. Once in the basement, the person felt compelled to keep a running, shouted conversation with whomever was upstairs. You did not want to be cut off down there. Sleeping in this house was a nightmare. The overwhelming fear of shutting off the light and daring to sleep. Myself and my niece both experienced this. In the back bedroom, too, there was a closet. The closet door had a tendency to suddenly slam open. My mom's explanation, it was hung crooked. When I was 14, tired of it, I put a latch on it. Some years later, the door flung itself open, hard enough to send the latch flying through the opposite window. Hung crooked indeed. The most terrifying event in the house was experienced by myself, my niece, and my dog. We were sleeping, both in my room. My sister was asleep on the sofa, and my mom in her room. Jennifer and I were awakened by a voice from the area of the basement, calling my name. I thought it was my sister, and asked her what she wanted. I woke her up. It had not been her. I woke my mom up. It wasn't her either. While I was talking to my mother, the voice came again, telling me to come to it. My niece asked my mom if she had heard it, and my mother replied that she had heard nothing, and that we were dreaming. Both of us, dreaming the same dream. Okay. It went on all night, and my dog, guardian of my well-being, hid under the bed and whimpered. We lived in the house for 17 years. During that time, we had bedding switched from one bed to another, tapes and records moved under furniture, and perhaps the most puzzling, we came home daily for a week to find bowls of hot food and cups of steaming tea set out as though someone had just been there yet the house was locked. We had a neighbor watch the house to make sure the kids weren't coming in, but nobody was seen to enter. To this day, whenever my niece or myself have a nightmare, it is set in that house. No dreams that take place in the house turn out to be good ones. I've actually had dreams that were going along fine, until I realized where I was. I also remember having a dream that I was married, and my husband had purchased a house. He took me to see our new house, and you guessed it, it was 4 Harrison Court. In the dream, the most amazing wave of terror swept over me at the thought of stepping into the house again. We have no idea what was wrong with it. We know the woman who bought it from us, and she still lives in it. My children and I had a very bad experience with a demon in a house that we lived in. My son became very scared one night as he viewed the ghost of a man with a sword sticking out of its side. This ghost was standing in the doorway of my son's bedroom very late one night. He said that this thing was just giving him the feeling of such terrible hatred and dread. It made my son feel like it was going to kill us. My son started sleeping in my daughter's bedroom, and that thing started going from room to room, looking for my son, and so it started coming into our room and scaring the daylights out of me. I had felt the hatred and anger. I know that it would have killed us if we had not gotten our pastor out there. When our pastor pulled into our drive, he said he felt the anger and hatred just emanating from the house to the outside. He knew what we were up against, and we immediately started saying prayers and his army of saints to fight for us. Ultimately, it worked, so while we were living there, we had no more problems. But whenever we drive by, we cannot even look at the house. Reading some of the stories that your readers have sent you brought back a memory I thought I had long forgotten, and I would like to share it with you. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, it did not occur to me, but instead happened to a childhood friend of mine. Being an ex-army brat, part of my childhood was spent in a suburb just east of St. Louis called Spanish Lake. It was called that for a lake that was near there and a favorite hangout of many of the townspeople. A nice lake during the day, but at night, it was said that the ghost of a sunken Spanish galleon walked the shores of the lake, especially during the summer months, in search of what was unknown. At one time, I'd been told that several people had simply disappeared from there and were never heard from again. Truth or not, I will not venture a guess. The lake was also said to have a section that was bottomless, and there, supposedly, lay the Spanish galleon. Being teenagers and fearing nothing, several of us used to go there with our girlfriends or boyfriends and park. But one night, my friend told me he had learned his lesson and would never, ever go there again. I came out of my house one summer's day in 1971, and I saw Randy up the street, absolutely throwing a fit, yelling, screaming, cursing, and in general, having the proverbial cow. He was standing near his car, a 1966 Plymouth Roadrunner, in mint condition, or at least it almost was, now. Something you must understand is that this car was Randy's pride and joy. He babied the car, and it was one of the fastest cars in the area at the time, as well as one of the sharpest looking cars. It was a painted metallic turquoise and built to the hilt. I asked him what he was so pissed off about, and he showed me. What I saw scared the bejesus out of me. It looked as if someone, or something, had ran their fingers down the entire length of the passenger side of his car and completely melted the paint where they had touched the car. He told me that he and his girlfriend, the night before, had gone to their favorite spot on the lake to be alone. He told me that they had been there long enough to fog the windows a little. During a pause, for breath catching or something, one of them looked out the front window, seeing what appeared to be a sort of red glow emanating from the lake itself. At first they tried to ignore it, their attention on each other, but unfortunately, they both became rather interested in it. Randy told me that within the glow, he started to make out what looked like a ball, just a little brighter than the glow itself. At this point, Randy told me that it appeared to start coming towards them. He told me that it looked like it was pulsing or something, almost as though it were alive. It came slowly towards them, and they got really scared. His girlfriend told him that she wanted to leave, right now. Randy told me that he tried to start the car, and absolutely nothing happened. Not one damn thing. It was almost as if all the power had been sucked from it. Meantime, the red glow continued towards them. He said his girlfriend became near hysterical, wanting to leave, but he told her that, try as he might, there was nothing he could do, and he was not about to get out of the car to find out either. All they could do was make sure the doors were locked, and the windows were up as far as they would go, and wait. He said that after a short time, the red glow completely surrounded them, and his car began a slow rocking motion at first. Then, without warning, Randy told me that the car began to rock more violently, and he said he and his girlfriend could hear a growling or something of the sort anyway. Then he told me that he could hear a scraping sound down the passenger side of his car. He said the best way he could describe the sound was like someone scraping their fingernails down a chalkboard. Randy said this went on for several more minutes. He wasn't sure for how long, and all he and his girlfriend could do was sit there and hold one another. She, of course, in tears, and Randy very nearly there himself. Suddenly, he said, the growling stopped, the scraping ceased, and the glow was gone. It simply wasn't there anymore. Shaking, he reached for the ignition switch and tried turning the key. He said the car started right away, and they got the heck out of there, not looking back once, and were grateful when they were back up on the main road and heading into town. By the time Randy had been able to calm his girlfriend down and get her home, it was very late, so he decided to just go home and try to get some sleep, but not before trying to see what kind of damage had been done. Randy told me that after he had gotten home, he went into the house, got his flashlight, and went back outside. He said that at the time, he saw absolutely nothing, and after very careful examination too. But the next morning, his brother had wakened him, wanting to know what happened to his baby. That's when he discovered what he had. He tried several times after to fix the problem, but within a few days, the fingerprints would reappear, just as if they were fresh. Shortly after that, I left Spanish Lake. I was told that Randy eventually got rid of his car, and I heard nothing more of it. But to be honest with you, I've not been too awfully curious either. When I was about 13 years old, I used to babysit quite a lot in my neighborhood. Back then, I didn't believe in ghosts or the paranormal. I lived in upstate New Jersey at the time. My foster family had recently moved into a new housing development in a small suburban town near the New York state border. The house next door to us was an old farmhouse. The housing development had been built on what had been the farm. The farmhouse had supposedly been built during the mid to late 1700s. When I came home from a babysitting job late one night, I looked out at the window for several minutes at the stars, trying to find the different constellations, as was my habit just about every night. Then, I saw a ball of mist which appeared to be walking down the middle of the road. I thought that it must be some kind of gas or water vapor, although I'd never seen anything like it in my life. It seemed so deliberate. It never veered from the road. I watched it go to the end of the block and make a right into the woods that led to New York State. It was weird, but I figured that there must be some rational explanation for it. The couple who had just moved into the old farmhouse needed a babysitter for a Saturday night for their 4-year-old daughter. I agreed to babysit. I arrived at the couple's house about 7 p.m. on a hot summer night. As soon as I entered their house, their Doberman Pinscher ran up to me and started barking at me and howling. He wouldn't stop regardless of what the couple tried to do. His howls became shrill and he began to growl at me. I'd never been afraid of animals, as I'd grown up around dogs and I like animals very much. This dog really scared me just the same. The husband put the dog down in the garage, where it finally stopped howling. I met the little girl, and then the mother put her to bed in her upstairs bedroom. When the couple left, I turned on the TV. Despite the hot night, there was not even as much as a fan in the house, yet the house was comfortably cool. At about 10 or 11 p.m. that night, the TV began to have interference and the lights dimmed noticeably. The television began to get so much interference that it became impossible to watch. The lights dimmed even more. I thought that there must be something wrong with electrical wiring in the old house. I sat by the light and began to read. The house was becoming cooler. Despite the hot night outside, this house was becoming cold. There was an Afghan on the back of the couch, which I wrapped around me. I went to the window, wondering why it was suddenly becoming cold. The window pane was warm. It was certainly warmer than the house was at the moment. I tried to open the window to let the warm air in, but I could not budge any of the windows. The outside world looked so strange from inside the house, as though you were looking at something far away, or looking at a picture of something rather than reality. Then I began to hear what sounded like a light footfall at the top of the stairs. I could only hear them coming down, but not up, on about the top 1/3 of the stairway. I looked to see if this little girl had gotten up, but she was sound asleep, with her sheet tucked in around her. As I sat reading, the footfall became closer and got louder. I stood by the stairway and watched. I saw nothing, but could still hear the footfall. I thought that this old house must be still settling to be making all this noise. Then, the footfalls began a pounding and seemed to reach the end of the stairwell. They were closer together, loud and insistent, but always only descending the staircase, never ascending it. Then, I heard a loud bang from the room, directly in line with the stairway at the top. I raced to the room, thinking that I might find the little girl there, or a small animal which might have gotten into the house and knocked something over. I turned on the light to the room. The room was very cold, and the light was very dim. The child was not there, and nothing was out of place. I recalled promptly from the small frigid room. The hairs at the back of my neck were standing up, and I felt a strange sensation, as though a current of electricity was coursing through my spine to the base of my skull. I checked on the little girl, who was sound asleep despite the racket, and still tucked her snugly into her bed. At this point, I was getting scared, but figured that there must be some rational explanation for what was happening. The footsteps continued their pounding, but now they descended all the way to the foyer. There was a deep shag carpet runner along the foyer. I could hear creaking floorboards beneath it and indentations in the carpet as though someone were pacing on it. I thought that there must be some really small animal on the carpet and decided to try to catch it. I planted myself in the middle of the carpet when something came over me. Everything went dark for a second. I felt as though someone had thrown something over my head, and for a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. This was no small animal. I was petrified. I ran up the stairs to check the child, and she was still fast asleep. After the incident on the carpet, the foothills started making their way up the staircase. It was like a playback of what had been going on most of the night, only in reverse. By the time the foothills reached the top third of the stairwell, they'd stopped the incessant pounding and were only slightly stepping, yet still only descending the stairway. Finally, they disappeared entirely. The lights resumed their brightness, and the television was no longer bothered by the interference. By this time, it was about 2 a.m., and the stairwalking had gone on for several hours. All through this, there had been not one peep from the dog in the garage. The couple returned home about 4 a.m. They asked me if everything had been all right. I had felt as though I had been losing my mind. I just told them that everything had been okay. The next day, my foster sister made a point of asking me, how did the babysitting go? I told her, the house is really weird. Then she told me, I didn't want to tell you before you went babysitting because I didn't want to scare you. She proceeded to tell me that the former owners had told her that the house was haunted. They told her that all the members of the family had seen the ghost many times. They explained that one of the original owners of the house, a Mr. H, had committed suicide by hanging himself from the attic door, which was directly above the top landing of the stairwell. They'd taken my sister for a tour of the house. When they had been renovating the house, they had discovered that the house beams and studs had been joined together by wooden pegs and not nails. This was a very old construction technique that was used because making wooden pages was easier than having to make nails. They took my foster sister for a tour of the cellar, which consisted of a maze-like collection of windowless cubicles. In each of the cubicles were manacles for hands and feet. Had Mr. H bought slaves to use as farm workers? In that area, the growing season is short and the winters are long and cold. Buying slaves would hardly have been cost-effective for such a short period of time. Long ago, the land there had belonged to the Rampo Indians. Had Mr. H taken these people as seasonal slaves and dispensed with them after harvest time? My friends went down to the town city hall to check the records of the house. The records show that the house was considerably newer than had been thought, about mid-19th century. This was after the slavery had been discontinued in the Northeast. The former owners of the house, who were also builders and renovators of old houses, said that the mode of construction that was used in the house would date the house as being much older. I guess we'll never know who was kept manacled in those airless little rooms in the cellar. We'll never know why Mr. H was driven to suicide, or if his death was indeed a suicide. Was the ghost that of Mr. H, or of someone else? Perhaps there is more than one tormented spirit in that troubled household. I'm from a very small town in Madison Parish, Louisiana. One cold February night, my 5 sisters and I were going to visit my dad's brothers, as was a habit of ours to do, a couple of times during the week. My father had a work van in which the motor was encased on the inside of the van. Since it only had a driver's seat and a passenger seat, some of us had to sit on top of the motor case. This night, in particular, we took a different route to our uncle's home for some reason unknown. As we turned onto a side street, only one of my other sisters and I saw a woman with long flowing brown hair down to her waist in a long flowing white nightgown glide across the street about 1 or 2 blocks ahead of us. My sister and both looked at each other at the same time and said, "Did you see that?" 1 second she was to our left, and the next she was across the street and then just vanished. When we got home later that night, I told my mother what my sister and I had seen. She said that many years ago, I'm not sure if it was in the early 1900s, a young lady who lived in that area was to be married. On her wedding night, her fiancé was tragically killed before the wedding could take place. The bride, who was very much in love with her fiancé, pined away and died from the grief of her loss. My mother said that my sister and I were not the only ones who had seen this lady. I'll never forget the apparition that I saw that night, and I truly believe that what I saw was a ghost from the past. I suppose that every kid imagines a monster in a closet or under the bed at one time or another, and I had in fact began to believe my experience to be the result of a young fertile imagination. You see, my room was located in the basement of my parents' home. Located next to the basement stairs, my closet ran under the stair and had only an open doorway, no door. As I lay trying to sleep at night, I was sure I could discern a pair of glowing red eyes staring at me from the closet doorway. This always filled me with a sense of fear and trepidation. I could never quite make out the body of the apparition, more like having an idea of the shape and size, but never really seeing it. I also had the strange feeling that the apparition indeed wished me ill. Furthermore, there was some force that restricted it to the closet. However, as I said, I'd begun to doubt the evidence of my own experience. Until years after I'd left the family home, my cousin came to stay with my mom and dad due to family difficulties. She stayed in my former room. Mom informed me that she was having trouble sleeping. However, she could not seem to get her to give any reason as to her apparent insomnia. My mother asked me to talk to her, fearing her difficulties stemmed from the problems in the family. She further believed that being closer in age might make it easier for her to open up. She described to me exactly the same manifestation I had imagined when I slept in that room. After a room change, she was once again able to sleep comfortably at night. My friend Christy is engaged to this guy named Sean. Sean has lived for most of his life at his parents' house in Cincinnati, Ohio. Sean's house is very old and just happens to be in a development that is situated over an old Indian burial ground. For as long as Sean can remember, there has been a ghost in the house. It imitates the voices of people who live in the house. There are many instances of Sean or his sisters being alone in the house and hearing one of their parents begging for help downstairs, only to go to the parent's aid and discover that the parent is not in the house. Sean even recorded it once while he was recording himself playing drums. In addition, there is a spirit that follows them and visitors around the house. It is a tall, dark figure wearing a hooded cloak. It has never harmed anyone, but merely made them feel uncomfortable. About a year ago, Christy made a trip out to Cincinnati to meet Sean's parents for the first time. He didn't want to tell her about the house because he didn't want to spook her. Sean's parents invited her to stay in the guest room, and Christy accepted. The first night of the visit, Christy was sound asleep when she woke up suddenly and felt something icy slide over her and felt like something was watching her. She got spooked and went over to Sean's room and slid into bed with him and stayed there for the rest of the night. Sean didn't tell her at the time, but the hooded figure followed her into the room. The same thing happened the next night, and Sean finally told her. She refused to stay in the house another night. When I was about 4 or 5, maybe even younger, I remember one night I was sleeping in my room and I awoke. I don't know why I did. I may have been dreaming. Anyways, I looked ahead of me to my wall and there was a face on it. It was blue, looked human, and this may sound strange, but I had a hat on that looked like one of those Arabian towels that they wrap their heads with. It spoke to me. I don't remember what it said, but oddly, I wasn't afraid of it. I don't remember the reaction, but I asked my mom if she remembered about when I told her there recently, and she said I used to tell her about a lady in blue visiting me quite often. I only remember telling her about my only experience once. I might have seen the face more than I remember. I don't think it was a dream, because I don't think I would remember a dream I had when I was 5 or younger. I'm 15 now, so it was at least 10 or more years ago. That's my experience. If anyone has had an experience similar to mine, please write me about it. I've only had one paranormal experience. It happened last October when my boyfriend had temporarily rented a trailer. We had lived there for almost 2 months and nothing out of the ordinary had happened. One afternoon, he decided to take a nap and I was in the living room watching TV. I started hearing this really strange continuous screeching noise. It sounded like it was coming from inside the wall beside his bedroom door. When I walked over there, it stopped. I sat back down and started watching TV again, and it started back again. This time, I walked into the kitchen. The bedroom was right beside the kitchen, and I started opening the bottom cabinets, and once again, the screeching stopped. I never said anything about it to my boyfriend because I didn't think about it at the time. A couple of days later, we were in the kitchen eating breakfast, and he told me that the day before, when he was there by himself, that he had heard a weird, loud, screeching noise. He said he tried to find where it was coming from, and it would stop when he'd look. I told him that the same thing had happened to me while he was asleep a few days earlier. We both talked about ghosts and laughed about it, pretty much dismissing it as a joke. A few nights later, his mom came and stayed the whole night and was asleep on the living room couch. This particular night, we were sleeping in the bedroom on the opposite end of the trailer. It was really late, probably around 3 a.m., and we had been laying there talking when I started hearing this noise. It was kind of like the screeching, but much quieter, and screeched in intervals, like footsteps. I thought my boyfriend had dropped over the side of the bed, making that noise with his hand against the plastic on the mattress. I said, "Brian, quit making that noise." He said, "I'm not making that noise," and held up both of his hands. He looked at me as scared as I looked back at him, and he said, "Get up and get dressed." As soon as he said that, you could actually tell where the screeching was moving through the room to the corner beside the bed and feel this undiscernible presence, and all of a sudden, the screeching just went crazy and so loud. It was right there. Needless to say, within a split second, it was the only one there. Now you can imagine 2 grown adults running into the living room to wake up his mom. She said she hadn't heard anything, but that we had scared her to death, running through the living room at 3 a.m. in the morning like we were on fire. We sat up in the living room for the rest of the night and moved back to my mom's house within the week. So far, that's the only experience that I've had. Hey, Phantoms! Hey guys, I'm back from vacation and I have a stellar video for you. So for this long video, please comment, like, and share. Subscribe if you're new. But really guys, I want to thank you for actually listening to this video and being a huge supporter of the channel. We recently hit 22,000 and I can't be more grateful for your presence. Seriously guys, I really appreciate everything you've done for me, and let's move on to the next round of the world. I don't know what that means guys, but seriously, every share makes a difference, so please go ahead and share this video. Let me know in the comment section of this video which story you like the most, and I did mess up and slur my words, but it's okay. I'm back from vacation. I need to get back to my slurring ways, and I'll enjoy October because, you know, I guess there's more videos to come. Anyway guys, love you so much, and I'll see you in the next video. And remember, if you want to go to England, you have to be as cool as me. Just kidding. Anybody can go to England as long as you have a passport and you don't overstay over 6 months, I believe, unless you get a visa. I don't even know what I'm talking about, guys, but love you, and bye-bye.